Apple redesigned the iPad mini in 2021, and recently I decided to buy one as a replacement of my iPad Pro from 2018 that had a cracked screen. And with that, you might be wondering, why would I swap out an iPad with an 11-inch screen, an M1 processor at 120Hz refresh rate, an A15 Bionic, so the iPhone 13's processor, with a smaller display being at 8.3 inches? Why would I do this? I'm going to be answering that very question in this video, so if that is something that interests you and you might be interested in an iPad mini or wondering what iPad you should be going for, stay tuned. Well, I'll explain all of that in a moment. However, I'm going to give you a quick answer of whether or not this iPad mini is worth it. Yes, only if you're looking at using this iPad as effectively a glorified phone and or just a media consumption device. Those are the only reasons why you should look at getting this iPad mini. Generally speaking, if you want a bit more powerful of an iPad, have that form factor, and end up with something that effectively is just going to be there for watching YouTube, watching Netflix, or maybe browsing things like Facebook, or for me as well, I use it with the Creator app and I have that open on there. I use it for reading scripts of my videos and all these different things. So for those purposes, they suit my needs very easily. And especially because a lot of people will end up going for, let's say, an iPad Pro or Air, when realistically they don't need the Air or Pro just because of the high performance. If you're going to be doing things like photo editing, for example, then yes, I would recommend going for an Air, but not a Pro really, purely because there's no point right now between those two, which I will talk about in a moment. But in terms of the iPad mini, if you want a very small, lightweight device that you can do very light editing on, and you can basically use as a borderline just iPhone, just bigger, then make sure to definitely get this iPad because it's actually a great value for money right now. In terms of what I use it for currently, it's basically just for going into the Creator app, playing Sudoku, watching YouTube, and then reading Google Docs for when I'm reading my scripts. What do you end up getting in the box? Well, a very basic thing obviously, the iPad mini. You get a charging cable with a power adapter and some standard Apple stickers. Well, in terms of what actually comes in the box, we're going to be talking about the iPad mini itself, the baseline model coming in at £479, which is the one that I got in purple. It includes the A15 Bionic, which is the same ones that you get in the iPhone 13 currently. It's an 8.3-inch display, which comes in the same form factor as the previous iPad minis, just with a bigger display. And it doesn't end up having a home button, so for people who do like the home button and like the fingerprint sensor from that bit, you're not actually all without hope. You end up having a fingerprint reader on the power button as well. Now, I feel like one of the main questions that you may end up asking yourself when you're considering to get this iPad is, why wouldn't you go for just a standard iPad, or why you wouldn't just go for the Air that's an extra £90, which gives you a bigger display, and not only that, you get the M1 processor, so you get more power. I think the real answer to that question is going to come down to the screen size, as generally speaking, there's no real reason to not go for a standard iPad over an iPad mini if you're just wanting a slightly better processor, because really the A13 and A15 for standard use, you're not going to really notice too much difference. But besides that, it's literally just down to the form factor. So if you want a smaller display, then the iPad mini is definitely for you. But why wouldn't you spend that extra £90 on getting an Air? Well, for me personally, I think the 11-inch display is a little bit too big for me currently, just because really I have no need for it. I don't want to hold the slab up in my hand like this all the time when I'm reading a script, for example. With this as a great example, I can just hold it like this if I want to, read the script, hold it with one hand very easily, there's no issues, and it's big enough display that I can read my script perfectly fine if I decide to hold it horizontally, which for me, like I mentioned, in terms of it, obviously it's a very nitpicky thing, but generally I don't like the fact that I could be holding it like that and then the weight goes in my hand and I drop it, purely because of previous experience of iPads. Just for me, I don't need it. I don't need the size for what I want to use it for. That doesn't mean that I necessarily think that the standard iPad, the iPad Air or iPad Pro are necessarily not worth it. This is just my opinion of which camps they kind of fall within. So the best way of putting this is that if you just want a small form factor iPad that is very powerful, a small display, there's nothing competing in terms of power as you're going to get with the iPad mini. Now, if you want a standard iPad because you don't like the gesture features, which you're still going to get with the iPad, but you want to use the home button, then for a lot of people who still like the home button, for example, a lot more people who are older prefer to still have the home button because that's what they're used to, then that's going to be the best item for them. And then in regards to the iPad Air, that's for someone who wants more power so that they can do more things on the go that their laptop could do. Again, they're still in this in-between stage where a Pro for me just isn't worth it. I'd love to make a video where I try and run my whole channel off of an iPad Pro for a week, for example. That'd be a great video. I think it would work very well. However, for myself, I know that I want to use a full version of Adobe Premiere Pro, which again, it only has Premiere Rush right now. So once Premiere Pro comes out and maybe the M2 iPad Pro comes out, then that video might end up being a thing. But in terms of it, most people will be fine with the 60Hz display that you get with the Air, as really with the Pro, all you're paying for is a better battery life, and as well as that, a better display, which really doesn't justify to me the jump up of £150–200. So why did I end up deciding to buy this iPad over the other iPads or other tablets out there? Well, really, it comes down to two main things. One was my requirements, the other one was down to whether or not I actually think an iPad was worth it, currently anyway, because I have an opinion on tablets that really I think a lot of people do when you've got a lot more tech than you need, but generally speaking I think tablets are a very niche market still. Yes, a lot of people have it, so it's not really niche, but I think very specific people need a tablet versus, let's say, people who could just get away with using a laptop. What were my requirements for the iPad? Well, really, I think the easiest way of answering this is, what did I use my previous iPad Pro for? Which was practically nothing. It was pretty much just a slab of metal on the side of my desk that one day I put my headphones down on and it cracked the screen, and then after that I never used again really. I used it in and out, tried to do some videos with it in terms of reading the scripts from it, and I eventually ended up selling it and then using that money towards this iPad. But in regards to what I used on it, it was pretty much nothing. It was pretty much just an entertainment device. I decided to get it because of the belief of I need to have what's best all the time. If I'm going to get an iPad, I might as well get the best iPad, versus the belief of, okay, what do I actually need? Because this is something that obviously I think a lot of people do fall into the trap of. I fall into the trap of this all the time. However, it isn't a thing that I've been falling into the trap of as much recently, which I will have a video at some point talking about Apple Watches. So stay tuned for that if you are interested in Apple Watches and just the smartwatch entire industry, which I find very niche and specific, that most people don't need an Apple Watch or smartwatch in general, besides people who are really into fitness or are elderly. That's my personal take anyway. But one of the main things that really irritated me with my iPad as well was that it would be on 50% charge, for example, and overnight it would die without me even using it. The battery was useless on the thing, and this is from day one. The battery life on it was horrendous, versus the iPad mini that I've got currently, where I can charge up to 100%, 50%, whatever battery life it's on, not use it for 1 to 2 days, and it doesn't even move a percentage, and if it does, it moves like 2% sometimes. Versus the iPad, which just drains battery, the iPad Pro I mean, it just drains tons of battery out there, out of nowhere, just for literally no reason. It's not like there's things running in the background, the battery just gave in. And this is from day one. It's not even like it was a faulty device, because I had it checked over, it was fine. So what I ended up wanting an iPad for really was, like I mentioned earlier, playing the occasional Sudoku game, watching YouTube on it, besides that, looking at the Creator Hub on there, because that's pretty much what I use it for, and using it to read my scripts for things like the long form videos, or even videos like this, where I've got a bit more of a lengthier script to talk about it. So with those requirements in hand, I ended up thinking, you know what, I've been eyeing up the iPad mini, liking the idea of it, and to be honest, I don't want to spend the extra £90 on an Air when all I'm getting for it is the bigger display and an M1 chip. And again, I don't like the form factor, I just think it's a little bit too big. And also, because I know I'm not going to be using it for anything that intensive, for example Lightroom or Photoshop, really I didn't need an iPad Air or Pro, mainly because I'm rarely going to be using them if I'm not just going to use my laptop instead, as I've got a MacBook Pro 14-inch M1 Pro chip, which does everything the PC behind me does. I usually use my PC most of the time just because I kind of prefer Adobe Premiere Pro on Windows versus on Mac. That's just a personal preference, but I use my MacBook if I'm wanting to basically edit a video, script a video, do anything creative on it and not be at my desk, and I do that quite often. For example, currently with the heat wave in the UK, I was using my laptop this morning purely because the heat that my PC gives out honestly just heats up the whole room way too much and requires me just to use my laptop instead. So it's a great difference of choice, but in terms of it, I don't need to use the iPad for video editing, photo editing, so there's no point of the M1 chip for me. Now, the actual big thing for me is my opinion on tablets currently, which is who they're for, but also the pro range ones that you get with Samsung, a Huawei, an Apple as well, and all of them, they kind of make sense, but they don't at the same time, or at least they are a little bit too ahead of their time for what you've got available on them. So if I go right away for who is an iPad for, I think an iPad is generally for someone who doesn't like using a Windows device, doesn't like using an Apple laptop, and wants to be able to use something that's like their phone, bigger, and does everything their phone does, just on a bigger display. If they want that, go for it. I don't see any issue of going for a tablet over a laptop, and most of the time you're going to get a more powerful tablet currently at that price range than you're going to get a laptop at the same price range, so really, you might as well just go for a tablet. Then the other issue for me is down to the iPad Pro range, and really pro range of any tablet out there currently. And that issue is that there isn't enough apps on there that distinguish it to be a pro device. And a great example, like I mentioned earlier, Adobe Rush. For me, I feel like if you're a creative and you're wanting to use a iPad as your daily driver device, they need to have the full version of Premiere Pro on there. That would make sense. A lot more sense than just having Lightroom and Photoshop on there. Photoshop is cool, yes, you can use the pen for your little designs. That's great. However, I'd love to be able to edit on an iPad Pro. That would be great, and I think that would be a cool experience to be able to entirely run a YouTube channel off of an iPad Pro. You probably could get away with it with Adobe Rush, but that's if you're using bare minimum edits and you're not doing anything that's overly intensive. I think that will happen one day when either the iPad Pro comes out with an M2 chip or an M1 Pro chip or M1 Max chip. I do think that the Pro range should have the option to have better processors in them. Maybe make the next iPad Pro ever so slightly beefier so that it could then have a bigger and better processor in it. That's just my thoughts anyway when it comes to the Pro range, purely because right now there's no reason to go for an iPad Pro. So is the iPad mini the best tablet on the market currently? I'd probably say yes in terms of its price range, as if you went for a normal iPad, you're paying an extra £160 for an iPad mini, which is a lot of money extra, but when it comes to it, you're getting a lot better battery life and a better processor for that price. Yes, it's a smaller device, but you also get the second generation pen, or at least, you know, you can buy the second generation pen, which is a lot nicer than shoving it in like it's a drumstick. But in terms of it, I do think that for the price range, it is the best. Obviously, for an extra £90, you could then go for the Air, which again, if you're just using it as a media station and effectively a glorified phone, you don't need an Air. A lot of people will want an Air just because they can versus the actual practicality of it. But really, I can kind of understand an Air, let's say, if you're someone who just likes the bigger display and you don't want a mini. Fair enough, that's understandable. But really, a lot of people don't need the Air just purely because if they say to themselves, I need it because it's the M1 chip. Really, you don't need the M1 chip for watching YouTube. That's the best thing. Really, if you're playing games, for example, on the iPad, then sure, the M1 chip will actually come in handy for that just because the Bionic chips are okay, but they're not particularly outstanding. But then with that as well, you've then got the Pro range, which again, like I've already discussed, 120Hz display and a little bit better battery. Is it worth it? Having the extra camera, is it worth it? To me, not really. I don't really see the point in it. And then when you look at the price range between all of them, you've got an extra £160 from the iPad to iPad mini, £90 difference between the iPad mini and the iPad Air, and then it's an increased price of £180 for the iPad Pro, which really what you're getting for that price is double the storage, which is okay, because if you want 128 gigs of storage on your iPad Air, I believe it's about £20 to £40 difference between the Air and the Pro, so really that's then the justification of spending that extra bit of money for that storage, plus the screen, plus the battery. But really, again, most people won't need that storage, most people don't care about the display, and most people can live without an extra hour or two of battery life. I do think Ali Abdaal did a great job of this in his video talking about which iPad you should get, as he does show off basically the difference really of what you get in terms of quality between the iPad mini, the Air and the Pro, where really I would agree that yes, the Pro you're getting 100% better with the 12.9 inch display and so on, but it's very incremental increases. Now in terms of the pros of this iPad, I'd definitely say the pros end up being the following: the price, the size and the battery. And the only con that I can really say from my about a month and a half of using this iPad would be the speakers. In terms of the price, obviously it's the second cheapest iPad you can get out there, so it's a blatant fact that it's the second best price that you can get for an iPad. But in regards to what you actually also get with that, when I'm talking about the pros being the size and the battery, I would say the battery is the best pro out of all of them, but the size is great. It's a nice form factor, especially for what I want, which is a glorified phone. I use it to watch YouTube, Netflix every now and again, very rarely, play Sudoku on it if I'm not using it on my phone, and go through the Creator app again if I'm not using it on my phone. And like I said, I then use it to read my Google Docs and so on, so it ticks all of those boxes for me. But like I mentioned, the actual best feature of this device is going to be the battery life. The fact that I can charge it and then just not use it for like 3 days and it loses next to no percent, between 2 and 5% after 3 days of just not using it and it being sat there, is amazing. It's something that they've done really well in all of their new devices recently, and it's actually outstanding. And when I say that, I'm not overusing the word. If you look at all of the devices across the board, it is ridiculous. As if you look at the iPhone 13 in itself, it does amazing battery life, lasts so long. Same with the iPad mini and the MacBook Pro that I've got. All of them have outstanding battery life, and I'm very happy with all of them. Obviously, with the battery life, it does end up running out fairly decently. I'd say that you get maybe about 2 to 4 hours of usage of actual on-screen time, depending on what you're using it for. If you're watching it for YouTube purposes, for example, I'd say you'll get about 4 to 5 hours out of it. And then in terms of actual more powerful consumption, let's say playing games on it, or if you're doing stuff like photo editing, you're going to get about 2 hours, just because the battery and the processor is not made specifically for those features. So the speakers for me are definitely one of the worst areas of this device, just because they don't sound too great unless you've got them on a high volume in comparison to, let's say, any other audio device that I have, which again, it's a very awful comparison, as everything else I have is great audio. My TV has decent audio, my AirPods, great audio, my Sony XM3s, great audio again, my speakers for my PC, great audio, the MacBook Pro 14-inch, great audio. The issue with this is just that they're being compared against all these better devices when it comes to an audio function, but really you get okay speakers for the size of the iPad, for the price of the iPad. Really though, don't expect to get outlandishly amazing just because you're paying £420 for an iPad and you think that, okay, I should be getting great speakers of that. Don't expect amazing results. They will be very disappointing if you do. It was disappointing when I first launched it. I was like, oh, okay. But when you have it on like near to max volume, I'd say about 75% to anything above that, the audio is actually okay. Anything below that, it just sounds like it's being pushed and blocked out from the speakers, which is really weird to me. It just seems like it's struggling to exit the iPad. It feels like the audio is just coming from literally the inside of the screen and just not pushing out of the gaps. But yeah, that's basically it when it comes to the only con of this device. What would I like to see in terms of the next iPad mini? Well, for me, I'd say that I would love to see the feature of you being able to swap out any form of processor into it. I think it'd be a cool little feature. Shove an M1 or M2 chip into the iPad mini, and I think so many people would buy that as a creative use. It'd be insane. Another feature that I think would be really cool for this though would be the next iPhone. The iPhone 14 I think would be set up to have their version of an S Pen, for example, a smaller Apple Pencil that could then just attach onto the side of your phone. I think that it would work. I think some people would buy it, not everyone obviously, maybe only have it available for the Pro phones as just a gimmicky extra that you could get for the phone. I just think it'd be something that people would buy if they had the choice to do so. It'd be cool, be a nice feature, give the S Pen a little bit of a run for its money in terms of those regards. People not just buying Samsung because they have the S Pen, who cares? Like really, it's a little pen that half the time you're going to get lost anyway. So again, it's kind of a negative for getting a pen onto the iPhone 14, but I think this iPad proves that they could do it because the small form factor, having the pen on the side there fits just fine. Obviously on the 14 they'd have to then get the pen a little bit smaller, but again, I think that'd be perfectly fine, especially for most people if they decided to get the pen anyway. But yeah, like I said, that's the only things that really hype me up because of this iPad would be the idea of a S Pen-like feature for the iPhone 14 maybe, or 15, and then also the idea that one day you could actually change out the processor for an iPad mini and get something that's actually a creative powerhouse in that tiny form factor. But that all being said, I hope you guys did enjoy this video. If you did, make sure to leave a like for more content like this in the future. I have a few other tech videos on this channel, primarily around Apple products, because really those are the main things that I actually really like covering, as I think they're a lot more I think they're a lot more fun than other products out there. There's a lot of Android products that are just a bit, they're okay, they're cool. I think some Windows devices, I would love to make some content about them once I eventually decide to buy a Windows laptop. But until then, I will be sticking to what I know, which is Apple products, and some things about gaming products, obviously, from what you can see behind me and the consoles. But yeah, I upload gaming content every single Friday and whatever I want on Wednesdays, which is where this video comes in. I'll see you guys in the next one. Have a good one.